Warning, the following program was produced for traditional broadcast television. Over 12 minutes of commercials have been removed, but interruptions are still included. Thank you for watching.
Today's episode, we're going to be talking about something that is a trend going across our country right now. It's a trend that I love, sound money. The states are trying to take action.
Paper is poverty. It's only the ghost of money and not money itself. When we have money that's backed by nothing, it will lead to poverty. This is actually what we're seeing. The divide between the poorest and the richest growing wider. The middle class is disappearing. This is causing a lot of the tensions we're seeing around the country. We need to protect our state's reserves, putting back into place either gold and silver savings, Bitcoin savings to make them inflation resistant.
Government officials insist we will continue to keep you informed as this story unfolds.
Welcome to the Money Block with Matthew J. Moore, the Bitcoin-focused program that's waking the masses to the Fiat money Ponzi scheme. Money is changing, and your freedom is at stake. So stick around and learn how to empower yourself for this new digital age. Now, here's your host, Matthew J. Moore.
And so, welcome, America. Welcome, world. Thank you for tuning in. You are watching America's Bitcoin-focused TV and radio show. Yes, we are syndicated coast to coast on BizTV. So if you're watching on TV, call a friend, tell them to tune in. If you're watching online, give us a like, comment, subscribe, be a part of that conversation. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about something that is a trend going across our country right now. It's a trend that I love, sound money. The states are trying to take action. We realize the monetary and fiscal policy of the feds, it's not so hot. So we got a special guest today. He is an Oklahoma State representative, Cody Maynard, and he has been leading the charge in the state of Oklahoma when it comes to sound money. Cody, we've got a short amount of time on this first segment, but I really want to kick things off and introduce people to kind of your background, because you are a practicing CPA who's dealt with real money issues every day. But what first drew you to this idea of sound money, and is it kind of one of the most important issues that maybe states are facing today?
Well, thanks for having me on, Matt. I would say sound money is absolutely one of the most important things happening right now that we need to be thinking about. So I think we've heard before that money is power, and that means that those with all the money, they have the power and they make all the rules. But we really need to stop and ask, who rules the money? So there's an old saying that kind of caught me off guard when I first heard it, was give me control of a nation's money, and it matters very little who writes the laws.
Yeah,
and
I think it was a Rothschild.
Yeah. Yes. As someone who writes the laws, that kind of hits hard of going, well, maybe I really need to look at who is controlling money. And so, because if you're controlling money itself, you can control everyone who's forced to use it. And so this really is this big risk of using what we call fiat money. And if nobody knows what fiat is, that is literally just money not backed by anything. It's literally full faith and trust of the government. And so our founders, they were very careful about money and limiting the power of the government, and because they understood that, government tends to grow in power over time. And every power that the government takes, they take from you and I. And it's a freedom we lose. So this is what really initially drew me to the idea of sound money, was realizing that I didn't really own and control the money inside my bank account. And this is why gold and silver matter and Bitcoin matters. It puts the power back with the people where it belongs.
I love it. Well, we got about a minute before we have to head to break, but was this revelation a while ago, or was this something that happened recently?
Yeah, so I would say initially I love technology, and so I was formerly trained in financial matters and accounting, and so I heard about Bitcoin probably about 2014, and I was like, what is this digital money? And it was just an investment to me. And so as I dove into learning about it as an investment, I started hearing about this $21 million cap. Yeah. And I was like, well, that's an unusual concept. We can't grow the money supply. So I kind of came to sound money backwards. A lot of people start with gold and silver. I actually started with Bitcoin and then started learning about the history of money itself. And so that's really what kind of got me into it, was just diving into what is money, how does it function, and it really opened up a whole new way of seeing the world.
I love it. I love it. Well, you're speaking my love language here, sound money, of course. But we got to run to break, and I want you guys to stay tuned, to stay put, because we got more with Representative Cody Maynard. He's doing great work in the state of Oklahoma. Proud to call him an Okie. All right, guys, we'll be right back after this break. Stay put. what does it mean to be physically, spiritually, and financially free? The right to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness, these were the ideas that made America. But what happens to these ideas when America's money becomes compromised? What do you do when the very thing that you're working for day after day is fundamentally designed to enslave you? Whether it was a conspiracy or not, you won't believe what is about to happen in this country. Arm yourself today with the truth and build your life on the foundations for liberty. Rediscover freedom in the 21st century and grab a copy of my Amazon best-selling book, Foundations for Liberty. For just $11.99, you can support this radio show by finding a copy on Amazon or by going to mattjmoore.com. Again, that's mattjmoore.com. Don't wait, because freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are back in action, segment 2, round 2 of the Money Block. So happy you tuned in. You could be doing so many other things with your time, but today you're going to be learning a lot, talking about our favorite subject, sound money. And in fact, if you are new to this idea of Bitcoin, gold, silver, sound money, the philosophical approach to maybe Austrian economics, well, I have got the perfect tool for you. It's a free gift, my way of saying thank you for tuning in. It's a digital download of my Amazon best-selling book, Foundations for Liberty. You scan that QR code, you get a free download. Second half of it is all about money. You'll love it. But on the line, we have a guest that I'm proud to, like I said in the first segment, call Inoki. He is a state representative here in the state of Oklahoma. His name is Cody Maynard. He's got a CPA background, but he's been leading the charge in the state of Oklahoma when it comes to sound money legislation. So, Cody, I'm going to pick up our conversation here. We got a lot to cover. So I'm going to start with this question. For those viewers who might not think much about monetary policy, can you explain in simple terms why sound money that holds its value, is limited in supply, is so critical for families, small businesses, and just long-term planning overall?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say, just starting off, I was one of those people that did not think about monetary policy or money itself. And that's where, as we mentioned, kind of Bitcoin opened my eyes to really understanding the importance of money that holds its value. And so this is what I want to talk about. So for families, one of the things I do often is budgeting, right? And sometimes that's long-term planning of, if you want to retire someday, how much do you need to put away and save? Well, that is a really hard decision because in 1971, our government broke the gold standard. So our money used to be backed by gold. It no longer is. And since just 1971, the dollar has lost about 88% of its purchasing power. And that's a big, big deal. So for families, if you've worked 40 years and you've saved for retirement, well, our Federal Reserve, they've already told us that they are intentionally trying to inflate the currency 2% per year. That's their target. Well, over 40 years, 2% is about 50% loss in purchasing. So that's a big deal for people that are trying to work and save. And money, if you want to think about it in really simple terms, when you do work, we store the value of that work in money. And so if you're working and you're trying to save and the government is slowly eating away at your savings, they are devaluing all the work you've put in over your life. And this is one of the reasons why, if you've ever heard people say inflation is theft, this is why we say that, because you're literally stealing from my life's work and my life's savings. And that's not okay. And, where we're at right now, we went through COVID. We've had over 20% inflation in just a matter of 4 or 5 years. So, simple terms for people, if you had saved up $1 million to retire with, that $1 million is worth really only about $800,000 now. And that was for no fault of your own. You didn't take any risk. You didn't take any bad investment. This is where gold and silver come into play, and Bitcoin. And the reason I will hone in some on gold and silver is because it's in the Constitution. So that is a money that we're allowed to use, and I know we'll touch on that in a little bit. But those monetary systems of gold and silver, they're not losing value over time. And we might have time to go through it, but they're actually gaining purchasing power where the dollar is losing it. And so this is why I think families really need to start opening their eyes to what money you're using, and to be aware that the government is choosing to eat away at your life's work and life savings.
Yeah, it's so sad, and that's why I do this show, is I want to awaken a whole generation, which I think Bitcoin's done a great job as far as narrative goes for educating people about money. But we all know that the federal government controls monetary policy in very large ways, but states are feeling the consequences of these decisions as well. What can state governments realistically do to protect their citizens, their own finances, from kind of a potentially fallout from just poor monetary decisions?
Yeah, well, some things that we can do just immediate is states, we have the ability. Article 1, Section 10 of our Constitution says that gold and silver is left as legal tender to the states. And this is one of the things that many states have barriers in front of using gold and silver as money. But we can do this right now. We can change our laws. We can take out the barriers and start giving people another way to use and save and spend. So that would be number one. I'd say the other thing that states can do, and this is something that maybe many people haven't heard of or aren't aware of, is we can start working for long-term structural change of the federal government. And so here's how you do it. Our founders, they were very smart men. They put Article 5 in our Constitution that says the states have the right to call a convention for the purpose of, we can edit our Constitution and propose amendments. So Oklahoma has already done this. I've signed on to that and been a member of this, where we have called for a convention of the states for the purpose of putting a balanced budget requirement on the federal government. Now, if you're not familiar with budgeting, like what that means is the federal government then cannot spend more than they bring in tax revenue. And we're in a perpetual state today where our federal government is spending deficits. If you hear about the federal national debt, we are at $39 trillion. I mean, that is a number that most of us can't fathom, but that $39 trillion, that literally is the inflation. If you want to know how much fake money is out there, there it is. We are spending money that we do not have. And so I'd say those are the two immediate things that we can do. One is easier because a state can change its own laws around gold and silver. The Article 5 convention, this is a long-term push. It does take 3/4 of the states to put together the same call. And so that one's a lot harder to do, but I think we absolutely need to work towards it.
I agree. And I think we have, 14 more to go, I think, to see something like that happen. So it could very well happen in our lifetime, because I don't know, I can't remember if it was like 2012 or 2013 when the whole Convention of the States movement started. But yeah, the 3 topics that they want to bring to convention, I mean, I would love to see something like that. In fact, it would be history in the making, because it's never been done before.
That's right. It would be the first time. And I don't know the exact count. Like you said, we are getting pretty close, actually, though, to that 3/4 majority call. And I think a lot of people, they forget the states actually created the federal government. Yeah. It was not the other way around. So we actually have the power, and we need to remember that as citizens. When we go vote for people in our state legislatures, we're actually voting for the body that creates the federal government.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, so yeah, I mean, I always when I talk to people about this and do presentations, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've always my beef has been, okay, well, yeah, you could make the argument that the dollar used to be backed by gold, and so therefore any taxes paid with dollars was paid in gold and silver. And any time that a state levies a tax is a debt owed on the people. So therefore, Constitution, Article 1, Section 10 states that, all debts must be paid in gold and silver. And so it's like, well, am I wrong for looking at it that way? Does that sound cohesive and kosher in the sense that we should be paying our taxes in gold and silver if it's debt owed, right?
Yeah, this is where we're going to get into maybe some judicial theory, and I'm not a judge, I'm not an expert in that, but I can tell you this, I can read, right? So from someone who read the Constitution, one of the weird things that stuck out is when it says that the federal government it says they can coin money. It doesn't say they can print money. And this is, those things of, well, how did we get to dollars when that was actually not something given? Our founders, actually, they wrote the Constitution in such a way that they meant to us to have a bimetallic money system of gold and silver, because they had gone through paper money. Like, that wasn't new to them during the Revolution. There was an old saying that it's not worth a continental. That was a paper money back then. And so everywhere, if you read the actual Constitution, it says coin everywhere, and then it uses gold and silver as tender. It does not use any paper currency. So I would agree with you, Matt. What we've seen is that courts have, over time, they have decided that dollars could be swapped out instead of gold and silver. And that kind of made sense, I would say, when the dollar was backed by gold. Because, you know, what it was is, if you want to think of it this way, the dollar was kind of a gift certificate, if you will, or a claim, right, on gold. It was kind of saying, hey, this paper, it actually represents a piece of gold in a vault. Well, that got broken down, 1930s, the government reclaimed all gold and silver. Most people don't know this anymore. They actually made it illegal to hold gold and silver, so they reclaimed it, and then they took the value of it, and they went from about $6 an ounce to $35 an ounce. So they inflated the dollar immediately, and then they wouldn't give back the right to hold gold and silver until 1974. Yeah. So this was after they broke the gold standard in 71, and then after that, they decided people could hold gold again. So that should tell you a little bit. The government's threatened by sound money because it puts restraints on them.
Sure does. And Thomas Jefferson was quite regretful later on in a letter that he wrote, basically stating he wished he could add an amendment taking away the power to borrow and making anything legal tender. But man, we got a lot to cover, and I look forward to this conversation. It's my cup of tea, but we got to run to break here. So I need you guys, if you're watching this show, stay put, stay tuned. And we got a lot of good content around this topic of sound money, what's constitutional, what's not. But we'll have to continue the convo in the next segment. So we'll see you guys right after this break. I promise you, you won't regret it. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Round 3, segment 3 of the Money Block. We are back in action, talking all things Bitcoin, sound money, gold and silver, Austrian economics. We're here to enlighten, to educate, and so if you're new to this space, don't worry. We got a little bit of something for everybody. In fact, if you are new to the topic entirely, all the way from the very starting point, well, there's a free resource, a free download. It's my Amazon best-selling book, Foundations for Liberty. You can scan that QR code, and it'll give you a free download. My way of saying thank you for tuning in. You can be using your time in a whole lot of other ways. But today I've got a great conversation going. We got a guest, another Okie. He is not from Muskogee, but he is a state representative, Cody Maynard, and he is leading the charge in Oklahoma when it comes to sound money legislation. Really a fan of his work, so we're going to dive into some of his work in this segment. But Cody, let's start here. In Oklahoma, you were the primary author of a bill, HB 1199, which recognizes gold and silver as legal tender and removes the capital gains tax on them. Walk us through what this bill actually does and why it was important.
Well, yeah, thanks. So 1199, this is one of those things where as you start reading the Constitution, like we were talking about earlier, it says that this gold and silver is left as legal tender to the states. And so it makes you start asking the question, well, if that's the case, why are we taxing it? Why are we putting barriers in front of using legal tender? And so I started diving into Oklahoma's laws to see, what was allowed, what wasn't allowed. So currently, Oklahoma law only allows U.S. minted gold and silver coins. Everything outside of that is going to have a tax on it if you use it. And so that was my immediate strategy of attack, was like, okay, well, let's take off those taxes. And so what it did is, if you had a piece of gold or silver that's weighed, stamped, and measured, so that way you know what quality you have, then it qualifies as legal tender, and just across the board removes all taxes. It can be used. And then the second thing that it actually restores was your ability to execute and sign contracts in gold and silver. So in law, we used to have what was called a gold clause. And what that meant is, like, Matt, you and I could say, hey, we're going to sell our house to one another, and I'm going to buy it in 10 ounces of gold. And that meant that when we closed that deal, you actually had to bring 10 ounces of gold and settle in gold. Well, somewhere along the way, the judicial system again decided, hey, U.S. dollars are legal tender, and so you don't have to use gold anymore. We'll let you substitute it. This restored that ability that if two parties want to contract and execute contracts in gold and silver, it had to be fulfilled in gold and silver. And again, I got lots of questions. This doesn't force anybody to use it. It just restores the freedom of choice that if you want to, that you can. And so that was kind of the essentials of what that bill did, was to restore true legal tender status back to gold and silver in the state.
Another bill that I watched was HB 1197 to create a transactional gold and silver depository in Oklahoma. In practice, how would this work, and what would it mean for everyday Oklahomans who wanted to use gold and silver as actual money?
Yeah, so, with the advance of technology, we have some really cool abilities we didn't have years and years ago. So what this really does is it lets you take physical gold and silver that the state would put in a depository, and then the state would issue you a debit card, MasterCard. You can go spend anywhere you want just like you would every day. And so what this truly does is it allows Oklahomans to hold and store their wealth in physical gold in a depository. It's going to be audited monthly. You've got, institution grade security. So, if you're holding gold at your house, you have to hope nobody breaks in and takes it. This is the top tier security where it is backed up for you. And then you get simply a debit card, and right now, if you wanted to transact in gold and buy a cup of coffee, like, you're going to have to go in there and try to shave off a flake, because gold is worth, it fluctuates, but maybe 4,500 an ounce today or so. And so this makes it usable, where you can walk in, swipe your card, they convert it in real time to say, hey, here's what dollars are worth in grams of gold, and then you can cash out later. And so that was the whole idea behind it, was to make gold usable again. And if you think about it, this is really a new face on an old technology. So we used to have, Fort Knox, you've heard of that, where they'd have all the nation's gold. Well, the dollars that were issued, they were called gold certificates, and each dollar was representing the gold in the vault. Well, it's the same thing. You now have an app where you can go in there and buy it. They tell you how many grams of gold that you legally have in that vault. And when you swipe your card, you can watch it on your app. It'll deduct it in grams. And so this is bringing gold and silver back to the forefront, making it usable. And we actually had a few other states that ran this similar piece of legislation. I do believe Florida's goes live, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in July 2026. So
this same concept.
This same concept. So this is starting to get deployed. Some other states are picking it up. So I'm super excited to see this starting to get deployed. And as more and more states pick it up, it'll make it easier and easier for others to get into that same system as well.
And those Bitcoiners who are listening to this going, why do we need this if we have Bitcoin? Well, truth is, we're talking about constitutional money. And if you watch my show, you know that I am a big proponent of Bitcoin. But if we're going to have any form of sound money that the state government gets involved with in any large way, as far as payments on taxes or transactional purposes, gold and silver is probably the way to go. But we're going to continue down this rabbit hole, because we don't treat spending or trading, exchanging U.S. dollars as a taxable event. But when someone sells or exchanges gold and silver, the state only treats it, or often treats it, with capital gains, right? Like a taxable, as taxable income. But why does this distinction exist, even though the Constitution specifically recognizes gold and silver as legal tender? We were kind of touching on that a little bit. Is it a speculative guess on your part, or do you have an exact reason?
I'm going to give you maybe a historical speculative guess, right? So when we went back in the 1930s, we confiscated gold. We took it out of the hands of people, and we've gone through this process of moving away from gold and silver as money. As that happened, then it opened up, we kind of reclassified it from being money to being property. And property is taxable. And that brought it under the U.S. tax code federally. And then as that happened, that kind of gives states permission. Well, if the federal government can tax it, we can all tax it. And I hate to say this, but governments are always looking for ways to get in more money. And so, my job is always to try to restrain that. But that is not the path that I have seen government take. In the early 1900s, there was no income tax. When it was first put in place, it was 2%, and that was only on top earners. And now you and I would be thrilled if we paid 2% in income taxes.
Right.
And so the government keeps growing, and as it's been growing, it's been looking for ways to gain more tax value. And this is one of the things that really bothers me about this is we're taking a hard money, right, gold and silver that can't be printed more of, can't be inflated. And so if it took you, when I started this bill about 2 years ago, it was $2,500 an ounce, right? So the government went out and they printed, just since COVID, about 40% of the dollars that exist were printed in the last 5 years or so. So that tax that they're taxing on is really fake money, and then they're penalizing you for what they did, not what you did. So when your value of that ounce of gold has gone up, it's really a tax on inflation.
Yeah, and man, I wish we had more time, but next segment we'll cover more of this, and we got more great questions. Guys, I hope you're on the edge of your seat. Stay put. We'll be right back after this break. And welcome back, all you Bitcoin newbies, lovers, and experts. No matter where you are in this journey of sound money, Bitcoin, maybe you invested in gold and silver, this is the show for you. We love talking about these topics. In fact, today's conversation has been great. We have a guest that I'm so happy has joined us because he's very knowledgeable on the topics that we were discussing, but also he's leading the way, leading the charge in the Oklahoma government, and the trend is going across the states when it comes to sound money. And but just in case you're new to this space and you want to learn more and you want to go deep and you want to start from the very beginning, well, you can always read the second half of my book, Foundations for Liberty. Scan that QR code. It's a free download. My way of saying thank you for tuning in. So what are you waiting for? Scan that QR code. Get you a copy of it. All right. Well, I've got, like I said, on the line, I've got Oklahoma State Representative Cody Maynard, and we've been talking about gold, silver, constitutional forms of money, and we were talking about how, it's not right that gold and silver should be treated in such a way that there is a capital gains tax. But let's dive into that a little bit more, because I guess my question to you is, could a state, Cody, like Oklahoma, legally recognize gold and silver both as not only legal tender, but also an official unit of account alongside the U.S. dollar, essentially providing kind of this alternative option or method? And if it did, would that be the cleanest way to maybe permanently remove any kind of state level capital gains tax on them? Or am I off here?
Well, I would say we, as a legislature, anything we pass is presumed constitutional until it's challenged by a court. So your first question, can we? We absolutely could. The question is, should we, or what's the best way to approach that? And that's where I think starting with legal tender status is the best thing to do initially, because we've gone for decades and decades now with people only thinking in terms of dollars. They don't think in terms of any other currency. And so we have to get people back into sound money first, get them using it before I would propose ever adopting it as a unit of account. Because right now, if I were to tell you, I have $1 million in my bank account, that would mean something to people. But if I walked over and said I have 50 ounces of gold, it wouldn't really connect, right?
Yeah.
So and they wouldn't necessarily convert that. Or if I said I had 50 Bitcoin, now to some of us we would know what that meant real quick. But most people, that wouldn't translate. And so that's why I think when we're talking about what can states do, we are bound by the Constitution. We are bound by that Article 1, Section 10, gold and silver as legal tender. And I think if you do use it as legal tender, eventually you might shift over to the unit of account itself. But I think that's going to be probably a long way down the road. We've got to work right now just on the immediate of restoring it to being a usable type of money.
Well, let's look at your House Bill 1203, the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Act. We were talking during break. You were quite surprised at how far it got through the process. But had it been signed into law, what exactly would this bill had allowed Oklahoma to do with Bitcoin and other digital assets?
So this bill, as it was named, the Bitcoin Reserve Act, initially what it was going to do is it lets our state treasurer take the funds that we're holding in savings and reserve accounts and to invest up to 5% into Bitcoin. And the reason that this is really, really key to me is we have those state reserves to help us balance our budget, and in times of maybe budget shortfalls or in high inflation times, that we have savings to back that up. And you need assets in there that are inflation resistant. And gold and silver are, and Bitcoin are. And so this is why I thought it was really key to give an option. And again, it wasn't a requirement. It was literally making this an option. And part of it, as we've seen ETFs launching out there that are Bitcoin ETFs or Ethereum that are digital assets, the state had no guidance in place for what they're allowed to purchase or not. And so this bill put in place that you could only purchase a asset that was $500 billion or more, which is a lot of money. So the only one that even qualifies right now is Bitcoin. It has a $1.2 trillion valuation. Ethereum is the closest one, and that's at 200 billion. So I wanted to make sure that the state wasn't investing in risky assets, but that we were picking sound money alternatives. But Bitcoin is digital scarcity, and I think we need to know that digital is the way of the future. And I may look at even doing some gold and silver reserves in there in the future as well, because I really want to make sure the state has sound money options available in our savings.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and that needs to happen. But in your opinion, I mean, when it comes to what unique properties Bitcoin, when we look at Bitcoin, it definitely has some properties that are different from gold and silver. But what makes it attractive as a potential state level reserve asset compared to maybe traditional options like gold and silver? Are there any big differences that you were looking at that you were like, this is why we need to hold Bitcoin?
Well, I think when you look at gold and silver, it's been a chosen monetary form for about 5,000 years. And a lot of that's because, gold, it's fungible, meaning one unit of gold is worth the same as another. It is divisible, but it's hard to divide. It's portable, but it's heavy. But the most important factor it had is that you can't print more of it. It's stable, and it's got a limited supply. Bitcoin was really, to me, it's the next iteration of the best properties of money coded into the digital world. So, I mean, Bitcoin, it is completely scarce. There's only 21 million, and that's not going to change. So it perfected, we're still finding more gold. Bitcoin has perfected that by limiting the supply. Bitcoin is completely portable. You can memorize it and go anywhere you want with it. There's nothing to carry. It's hard to steal unless you give somebody away your keys. It's divisible down to the 100 millionth decimal point. So easy to divide and spend. And so this is why I think Bitcoin is that perfection of money. And it's going to take a while, I think, to get the adoption there. But for those very reasons, I think it is a great way to protect purchasing power, because it is, in my opinion, probably the purest form of money.
And as this was happening, there was a big push across multiple states to get a Bitcoin strategic reserve passed. Some were more successful than others, but the trend is there nonetheless. But what did you learn from the process? And do you see, if you bring similar legislation back to the table in future sessions, what would you do differently?
Yeah, so I would say, one of those things when running this bill, honestly, and I told you this during the break, was that I was actually shocked I was able to get it to the House floor. There's just so much learning that needs to be done that a lot of people have now heard of Bitcoin, but they don't understand what it is. And so when I was able to get it through committee and through the House floor, I was thrilled. That was awesome. Some states were able to get it all the way through, and Texas actually bought $5 million of Bitcoin. So there's a true reserve. And I think, part of this is the teaching and training of people, were just even getting it out there so they hear about it. So one of the things I learned is that people are still kind of scared of Bitcoin. They don't fully understand it. And so we've got to do a better ground game on education. Banking is a big question mark. So since a lot of banks have been restricted from using and holding it, that's put up some barriers. Just in practicality, there's multiple bankers that are in the legislature, and so they have hesitations with it. So I think, as we keep bringing clarity to the areas of banking, bringing clarities to taxation, bringing clarity around Bitcoin and people understanding it. This will get easier and easier to pass. And I do plan on bringing similar legislation back. I haven't figured out what the final form would look like. You know, I definitely learned some things running it. I started out with a 10% investment cap, and that made a lot of people nervous. So I found that 5%, people were more okay with that. So, you know, there's some of that stuff you learn of like what's their tolerance for different allocations. It allowed pensions to invest in it. Well, that brought up lots of questions. And I actually found out, oddly enough, people were more okay with the pensions than they were with the state treasury. So, yeah, and again, there's lots of reasons we could probably dive into, but there's just things you kind of learn when you put stuff out there and you're like, okay, well, maybe I focus on pensions and we start there because they are invested for the long term, right? And that's the perfect case for Bitcoin. Bitcoin over the long term goes up and to the right. And so I definitely want that in pensions.
Well, we have about a minute before we have to go to break, but I do want to give you the option. I know we haven't discussed this, but is there a way, if people wanted to follow your work, get in touch with you, what would you do? Like where would they go?
Well, some easy places. I've got a website, CodyMaynard.com, that you can always go onto. There's ways to contact me there. Go to Facebook at Maynard for OK. You can always message me on Facebook. And, of course, if you go to okhouse.gov, that's the official state website. It's got my state email, my state phone number, so you can always call and reach out there as well if you need to get a hold of me.
I love it. All right, well, guys, like I said at the beginning of this segment, if some of these concepts are completely new to you, you need to do a deep dive or at least get a primer. I wrote a book, Foundations for Liberty. You can scan that QR code, get you a free copy of it. Do some reading. Learn about sound money, Bitcoin. What is constitutional money? How did we go from this to now fiat dollars today, backed by completely nothing? Well, we go through that entire process in my book, so hopefully you'll enjoy that read. But guys, we are going to, like I said, jump to break, so stay put, stay tuned, call up a friend, tell them to tune in if you're watching on TV. If you're watching online, comment, like, share, be a part of the conversation. We'll be right back after this break. AI is here, money is changing, but freedom has never been more important. I'm Matthew J. Moore, the Money Block host on BizTV, Amazon bestseller, and Bitcoin policy advisor. Book my up to 60-minute talk, Redefining Wealth and Freedom God's Way. I'll teach your church, business, or civic group how to secure money, freedom, and faith in the digital age. This is urgent, so I'm slashing my fee from $1,000 to $500. Cover my travel, and I'm there. Scan the QR code now. Spots are filling fast. What does it mean to be physically, spiritually, and financially free? The right to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness, these were the ideas that made America. But what happens to these ideas when America's money becomes compromised? What do you do when the very thing that you're working for day after day is fundamentally designed to enslave you? Whether it was a conspiracy or not, you won't believe what is about to happen in this country. Arm yourself today with the truth and build your life on the foundations for liberty. Rediscover freedom in the 21st century and grab a copy of my Amazon best-selling book, Foundations for Liberty. For just $11.99, you can support this radio show by finding a copy on Amazon or by going to mattjmoore.com. Again, that's mattjmoore.com. Don't wait, because freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Final round, segment 5 of the Money Block. We're going to finish strong today. Been talking sound money, gold, silver, Bitcoin. This trend that is taking fire across all the states in a good way. Today, we have had a great guest. His name is Cody Maynard. He's an Oklahoma State representative. Proud to call him an Okie. But he's been leading the charge for sound money in our state. And so I want to continue our conversation here in this last segment. Cody, if we continue down this current path, record-breaking debt, ongoing money creation at the federal level, what do you see as the most effective steps that states can take in maybe next 5-10 years to safeguard their budgets and their citizens from loss of purchasing power, essentially?
Yeah, so I'd say a lot of it's going to be in line with what we've talked about, but there's about three things I kind of come to mind. So the first is that we need to protect our state's reserves. So putting back into place either gold and silver savings, Bitcoin savings, giving an allocation to make them inflation resistant. That'd be, to me, one of those initial steps. And second, we need to give citizens the exact same right. We need to open back up the ability for citizens to store their wealth in gold and silver, or I would love in Bitcoin as well. I would wish we could remove a lot of those barriers. That's a little harder on the constitutional side, but that would be fantastic. And again, the third thing, we really aren't that far away from being able to call a Article 5 convention of the states. I think if we focus on it and push in the next 5 to 10 years, that could be very feasible. And if we could push DC to a balanced budget where they can't keep printing dollars, that would really protect the states. Because on the state side, we're constantly scrambling, trying to keep up with inflation. A simple example, I'm trying to build a bridge in my district. Well, from when we started, we put out a price point. Well, some of the inputs for that, for like concrete, have gone up 50% since we started that bid. It is so hard to try to even build something because the costs are just running away from us because of this spending. So we've got to get those controls around the federal government. And the last piece I'm just going to push on real quick is just, if we were to make this practical, what is inflation doing? If we look at like generationally, so if your parents were to just run up their credit cards and max out all their debt, and then they passed away, instead of leaving you an inheritance, they left you debt that you were now required to pay off. Legally right now, debts go away when you pass away. That doesn't happen in the government.
Yeah.
So when the government prints $39 trillion, guess who's going to get to pay that? That's going to be our kids and grandkids, and they didn't get to vote for it, but it's going to be their obligation. And this is why we have got to return to sound money standards and stop pushing stuff off to the next generation.
Yeah. Well, and this is kind of coming off the cuff here. So I want to know your thoughts on this, because I don't know where I stand on this yet, but I've been thinking about this, and I was like, state governments, their budgets, obviously they're fighting inflation just as much as the citizens are. And, operationally speaking, it's nice to know, okay, we got money reserved up in case we need it for an emergency. A lot of families do that as well. I personally love to invest in assets that do better than inflation, that beat inflation. And it's money that goes to work for me, which provides relief to me personally. And I hear some legislators talking about, oh, we've got all this extra money, we should give it back to the taxpayer, it's their money. And I get that sentiment, but I also look at it too, and I'm going, okay, well, hypothetically, if we had investments, vehicles that were not only outperforming inflation, but were generating a return for the state to, patch holes where they might need to be, maybe that's a good idea. But then other people think, well, government's not a good steward of our money anyway. So do we really want to trust them with growing and having these investments, work for the state to pay for things or to protect them from inflation? I don't know how I feel about all this, and because I see it from both angles. What's your take on this? Because I thought, well, maybe we don't have to raise taxes if we've got investments that are producing income for state operations.
It's a tricky question, because on one side, when you let government just consume and build these giant accounts, they're going to just spending it, and they'll spend it recklessly. And so there is this balance point, to be honest, of having enough that they can balance budgets and have a savings and reserve. But I don't necessarily want the government having so much, because and on a real scale, what ends up happening is when people say, well, we really need to do this project, well, they just go, well, let's spend it. Let's just do it. And so sometimes they'll do it on projects that you wouldn't think would be a good idea to spend the state's money on. And so I think there is, for me, my goal is to give the state's financial resilience and leave as much money in your pocket as I can. And that's kind of, to me, that it's a constant tension, a balance point of how much should we have. But we have to keep upping the state reserve because those dollars don't purchase as much. So it is this weird balance we're walking through.
Would a constitutional spending cap linked to inflation and population solve some of those problems?
I think maybe, but here's my hesitation on it, if you will. when we link things to inflation, we always quote the CPI index, the consumer price index. That index doesn't measure everything. And so often when that index is throwing off a 3% return and I go talk to businesses in my district and I say, how much did costs go up on you? They said 15%.
Yeah.
And so the government gets to pick what goes in that CPI index, and they want it to be as low as possible. So they swap out what they put in there to control that number. And so that's my hesitation. I think it could work really, really well if you have a number that truly picks up all inflation. But if you don't, that's where I think that even that amendment could become dangerous, where the government's manipulating that CPI number. And so we might actually get ourselves in a bind that way.
Yeah, those dirty rascals. I know. I feel you. Man, okay, well, we've got a couple more minutes before we have to close out the show. I do want to, I don't know, I guess give you the floor a little bit. Is there anything that we didn't cover? Maybe something that you want to mention to the viewers, Oklahoma taxpayers? Like, what would you leave with us as a kind of a final thought overall?
Well, I'm going to leave you with one of my favorite quotes from Thomas Jefferson. So he's a very, very wise man. One of his quotes, he said, paper is poverty. It's only the ghost of money and not money itself. I think we need to remember that when we have just, again, money that's backed by nothing, it will lead to poverty. And this is actually what we're seeing on a wide scale, is we are actually seeing the divide between the poorest and the richest growing wider and wider. The middle class is disappearing, and this is causing a lot of the tensions we're seeing around the country. And so a lot of that can be fixed with sound money, and that's why we've got to return to hard money standard.
I love it. I couldn't have said it any better myself. All right, Cody, thank you for joining us. We'll see you guys same time, same place. Adios.
The opinions and suggestions expressed on this program are solely those of the participants and are not necessarily endorsed by program sponsors or any station, media company, or platform broadcasting this program. This program is a product of Moore Media, LLC. The information in this broadcast is not intended as investment, tax, or financial advice. Matthew Moore is not a licensed investment advisor and speaks solely from his experience and opinions. All information in this broadcast is for entertainment or educational purposes only. Matthew Moore, Moore Media, LLC, and the company or platform broadcasting this program is not responsible for the success or failure of any person's investment decisions or purchases. Matthew Moore, Moore Media, LLC, and the company or platform broadcasting this program makes no and expressly disclaims all representations, warranties, and guarantees with respect to this broadcast and its sponsors. Investing in any market is inherently risky and can be financially dangerous. Invest at your own risk.